Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another Friday seminar series session. Today, we are going to focus on strategies to create and manage a successful research team. And what we have done today is assembled a panel of investigators from across several of the departments of the college to talk about some of the strategies that they have brought to bear in assembling their teams, managing their teams. As you'll hear, they all do the focus of their research. If you don't know some of them, is I think covers a lot of the breadth that we have throughout the college. And these are also members of our faculty. I'm very proud to say were nominated for this session either by other members of our community or the Office of Research Administration in the college as being members of our community who do a really great job in working effectively with that office, in managing their teams and staying on top of the details that sometimes, to be honest, when we manage teams can be challenging and maybe not always the favorite part of what we do, but are also critically important to success. So I'm going to start with some very brief introductions. I've got some questions that I want to ask the panel to get the discussion rolling, but as always, we want this to be interactive and engaging for all of you. So if, as we go along, if you have questions or comments, feel free to put them in the chat, put them in the Q&A feature. We will definitely set aside some time at the end. But if you also feel brave enough to chime in verbally and raise some questions or ask something in real time, I'm more than happy to, have us go off on a branch of this tree of this discussion. So in no particular order, let me briefly introduce our panel today. So first, Dr. Shiv Hiremath, who is trained as a physical therapist, I believe, but also has a background in engineering and works in the Department of Health and Rehabilitation Sciences. Some of you may not see Shiv all that much because his lab is in the basement of Pearson McGonigal. So if you're not in Pearson McGonigal regularly, or you're not in the basement of Pearson McGonigal at all, you may not see his lab. And Shiv and Jeff Wright and Chris Thompson and Laura Bayer actually have a really impressive lab set up in that basement. So if you ever get a chance to go down and see their shop, I definitely encourage you to do so. We also have Dr. Liz Heller-Murray, who's an assistant professor in the Department of Communication Sciences and Disorders, who does work both on the pediatric as well as the adult side of the street, but also works with doing assessments one-on-one with individuals, as well as coding data from speech and language assessment. And I'd be remiss if I didn't go back and say a little bit more about Shiv. Shiv's work has to do with physical therapy interventions for individuals with spinal cord injuries, and most often incomplete spinal cord injuries. So they're not fully paralyzed, but they have injuries to their spinal cord, which make it more challenging for them to move and have the strength necessary to get through their activities of daily living. Then we have Dr. Risa Jones, who is chair of the Department of Epidemiology and Biostatistics, is also a very active investigator who, over the arc of her career, has done not only big data research, where she likes to say, where I work as an epidemiologist, but there are other times where she also works as a biostatistician. She's had some really high profile and impactful projects in the college over the last couple of years, including working on a grant related to PFAS, some of those ever chemicals that are often in the ground and water supplies, and leading a study of looking at those issues in the greater Philadelphia area as well as around the country. And then she's also working with several members of the college on a large grant for the Centers for Disease Control, looking at issues related to long COVID and the individuals who unfortunately continue to suffer with symptoms from the virus months, if not years after the fact. And then finally, we have Dr. Elizabeth Thomas from the Department of Social and Behavioral Sciences. As some of you probably know, Liz is also part of our TU collaborative on community inclusion, where she does a lot of work with individuals with serious mental illness and looking at strategies to make them feel part of the communities in which they're in. A lot of her work is actually focused on late adolescents and early adults, meaning college-age individuals. And as you know, as many of you probably read back in the fall, Liz, along with colleagues from the collaborative, had a wildly successful fall with respect to extramural funding, receiving, I believe, if memory serves, 3 major grants in 3 days, which is something I've never seen before in the arc of my career. And it's great to see Liz have that success building on the outcome of her K award. So thank you all for joining me today. And let me kind of throw this first question out to all of you. So thinking back to when you initially started your labs, and I'm going to ask you to focus for those, for Shiv and Liz, since you came to Temple and Risa too, maybe not so much starting your labs, but also transitioning your labs to Temple. Obviously, there are countless tasks to address. How did you go about prioritizing what to tackle first?
I can get us started. Um, I assumed that everything was going to take a very long time. So the first thing I did was try to find something that I knew I could work on in the background to start getting things out. So I located a data set that I know I could use so that I could have that going sort of in the background, while I then started shifting to one of the first things I prioritized was a lab manager to help me with some of the other aspects. So I sort of did both of those at the same time for that purpose of saying I want to put in the time to really get everything set up, but I need to start moving on other things now.
Yeah, in my case, I think my postdoctoral training helped me figure out like what might be needed. I think there's a book that I recommend, especially for new faculty members, which is from Howard Hughes Medical Institute, called Making the Right Moves. At that time, it was in the first version, just getting a general idea of what a lab is, what types of people. I think Liz mentioned lab manager. So for me, I think it was thinking about the equipment, thinking about hiring, and thinking about which avenues I wanted to pursue in terms of my research needs. And also, I think I didn't have a great training in management of people and management of things. So I did read some books by one of the books that really helped me was something called as High Output Management by Andy Grove, who talks about how things work at different timelines and how to integrate those. So those were things that helped me figure out, and also talking to other colleagues within our college and other colleges who could order equipment, could go through these different HR and other processes to get people on board. So that was my experience here.
Shiv, as we hear from other panelists, if you've got a moment, can you put both that course and that book in the chat for
Sure.
people who are interested? And I think for all of you, and I apologize, I didn't think of this in advance, but for all of you, if you make specific recommendations to resources that you think would be of value, feel free to drop them in the chat so people can, pick them up in real time and take a look at them. But that's great, Shiv. Thank you.
I'm happy to go next. I think for me, I might have had some unique circumstances in that when I came to Temple, I joined an already well-established team. I joined the TU Collaborative as a research staff member, and then from there transitioned into a faculty position and a PI. So by the time it came time for me to develop my own lab, which by the way, I really see as falling within this larger center, I already had a strong set of collaborators I was working with. I was already familiar with Temple systems and processes, and already had a funded project. So I think that really allowed me and freed me up to focus mostly on recruiting and hiring staff, ordering supplies, building the infrastructure that I needed to carry out this project. But I'll contrast that experience with a kind of a more recent experience I've had with developing this cross-institutional center. This was one of these grants that David, you mentioned, happened in the fall. So we brought together 2 centers to create a new center, and already had, again, lots of great collaborators, staff involved. So in this case, the priorities were more on establishing a brand, developing a name for ourselves, kind of establishing our visual identity. We also are very, one of our kind of core values is community engaged research. So we're focusing on building our capacity within our center to do that well. And starting kind of, as Liz was saying, thinking about some quick products that we could get out to share our existing knowledge and to build brand recognition.
I agree with everything that's been said. And also to David's point, this really depends on where you are in your career. So nothing's really been said, or not much has been said about somebody brand new to research. So, you know, if you're PERC faculty or faculty that really doesn't have a lot of funding, one of the first things to prioritize is probably finding good students that can work with you and help you increase your productivity. I started with master's students when I first started my career as an assistant professor, and then of course added PhD students, fellows, undergrads, etc. Just some things just logistically to also prioritize. I made sure that I had onboarding materials for them. I wanted them to feel grounded in the work that they were going to be doing. That included doing city training. Also, they had to sign a confidentiality agreement for whatever grant they were working on or whatever research they were doing with me. And then they read grants, IRB protocols, seminal papers, my publications. So that would be something, you know, if you don't have funds to hire that research manager. And then the other aspect would be, if you're new to an institution or have been at Temple and haven't really been engaged in research, it's setting up informational meetings with people who have like interests to be able to determine, you know, if you would be able to work well together or what those shared interests might be. So those would be the things that I would recommend if you're just starting out more so with trying to develop a lab.
Risa, I really appreciate you kind of taking the discussion in that focus, because I do think in many ways that's a really important lesson for people who are listening, who are in that place, but also, you know, as we begin to think about you know, prioritizing instruction versus research in the college and course load issues and so forth, you know, I do think we're going to have a growing number of members of our community who are interested in research. And I think anything that those of us who do it, you know, spend more of our time on it now can do to pay it forward and to set them up for success is critically important. But one question, or as a follow-up from that, Risa, that I'd love all of you to comment on. Risa, you talked about the value of attracting good students, and then also some of you talked about, you know, hiring a lab manager. What qualities have all of you looked for in terms of what makes a good student? What leads you to think that you're interviewing somebody or you've hired somebody who not only can do well, but in some cases thrive in the position?
For me personally, first and foremost, it would be curiosity and eagerness. And then, of course, they're not going to be successful working with me unless they have some quantitative chops. So there's also that. But I definitely I've had students, you know, with behavioral research, I've had students that have been engaged with me, and even now as interviewers. And so the quantitative experience or skills that they need to be an interviewer in the community isn't the same as if I'm wanting them to do analyses. So I think also just thinking about what the best fit is for the role or for the work that you're wanting them to do. But basically curiosity and eagerness, and just a general, would they fit with the group? Would we get along? Would they get along with the other students?
What about the rest of you?
I think I agree with Risa, and a few things that I have observed are depends where they are coming from, like who referred them is a good indicator. Plus, I think attitude, I think, is very important. If they have that learning or growth mindset type of an attitude, they may think that they are coming to do X, but they might end up doing Y. So having that openness or attitude really helps, you know, just helping the lab, helping the PI, as well as, you know, helping themselves into what they are really interested in. Those are some thoughts.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said so far. I think when I'm interviewing a student, I tend to treat it as a two-way process. I give a lot of information about my lab, the kinds of projects that we have going on, and I try to let the student explore within those projects what might be of primary interest to them, or what are some skills that they might want to build that I could help them build in the process of working with me. And I think the students that have the most success in the lab, that get the most out of it, are not only interested in the content area, but also have, again, professional goals or skills that they're wanting to develop through our work together. So I try to be mindful about that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And I think, at my point here where I'm at in my lab, I have mostly undergrad. So I have a lab manager, mostly undergrad, and then I do have some master's students. So I try to remember that the students that are coming from undergrad, they don't necessarily have any experience. And from an equity perspective, I try not to let that play in. I think there was a time when I might have said, well, let me see everyone's CV, let me see your transcripts. I actually don't do that anymore. If I have space and we have a conversation and you're interested, we do a 1 semester trial, because I say, you need to see if you like what I do. I do a lot of intricate work. I do a lot of looking at speech signals, and that may not be, you don't know what research is until you do it. Or we may not be a good fit, or, I may have to go another direction. And I keep that very open. And I do that for a semester. And then we either pivot to another project, or they decide that it's too much for them with their classes, and we sort of go from there. But that's different to how I've done stuff in other capacities in the past, where I've been very much like, oh, well, this person's really impressive because they have a lot of research experience, which really just comes down to privilege more than anything else. So really changed that up over the years, and I found that it's very successful. And I have a lot of students, and a lot of them are, first generation, have never had any experience with this, and have really found this love of research. And there's something almost even more rewarding in that. So that's sort of how I've structured things.
So I want to, with my next question, I want to go back to a comment, Liz, that you made in your first answer. You talked a little bit about how early on you focused on not only setting up your lab, but you also kept an eye on making sure that you had access to data sets so you could maintain your productivity. Because I think, one of the issues is obviously when we get a new grant or a new project, if it's a longitudinal project, 3, 4, 5 years, the products, the main papers are years away. And yet, both in terms of hitting our marks internally with regards to tenure and promotion, but also advancing our careers more generally, we still have to remain in the game. We have to publish every year. And, even though the NIH keeps saying that they're going to, change the way they look at these things and encourage, tracking of productivity each year, they haven't done it yet. I suspect at some point that they will. But I do think that's a critically important point. So I would love to hear all of you comment on, and Risa, you touched on this a little bit too, how you allocated the time being inward focused, focusing on the people in the offices down the hallway and so forth, versus going out and meeting collaborators in the college, at the university, in the region. How did you strike that balance, and how did you do that without exhausting yourself?
So I'm highly scheduled. So, and when I say that, like if you're busy, you're not going to get things done unless you really stick to a schedule. At least that's how I function. So I have standing meetings for all of my different teams and different groups, and that really is helpful for balancing competing demands. So it also helps. I have weekly meetings with all students who work with me, regardless of what project they're on. I also have regular standing meetings with each research team that I have. I also have regular meetings with specific subcommittees within the grant. So I might have an analysis team meeting that's regularly scheduled, or an exposure or modeling team meeting. And then that's different than meeting with the project director or the research program manager on a regular basis. So, but with all of that being very scheduled and having standing meetings in a given semester, and I tend to do it semester by semester, then if I'm not scheduled, it allows me to then go to meetings or explore other collaborative opportunities. So, by being scheduled, it doesn't mean that I don't have the flexibility. It actually means that I know when I have those openings to be able to either reach out or be responsive when people contact me for collaboration.
What about the rest of you?
Yeah, I think that for me, it was really thinking, I mean, I don't even know how I don't even know like what the percentage would be as I would balance it, because it's one of those things where I really said, all right, I need something that I'm productive and that is some collaboration, but it also needs to be something that can start right away, right? Like if I'm building a collaboration with a new MD in clinic and we need to go through a whole bunch of different things, that's actually more of a long-term project, even if I'm going to be getting data for them. Versus if there's something open access or something where all I need is, a data use agreement. So starting to learn, hey, how can I get something easily? If it's de-identified, could I hit the ground running? Or is this going to be a long-term conversation about really opening up a longer collaboration? So I think really making sure that whatever I'm doing in the background is something that is not a lot of effort for me. Because if it's a lot of effort for me to even get that data, then it's not fulfilling what I need it to be. Because that effort needs to go towards things that are multi-step and are going to be a bigger picture. So that's kind of how I think about it.
Yeah, in my case, I think in the beginning, I spent a lot of time internally, like within the college, within like the program / meeting with a lot of people. Like I think I remember my first week on campus, I met with you, David. I met with Mark, Gretchen from TU Collaborative, like just understanding what different areas folks are working on, identifying if, just like Liz mentioned, any data sets that I can, bring my expertise to, help build some collaborations, understanding the processes. And as I was able to build my team with one postdoctoral fellow and, slowly start putting things in place, then I was able to spend more time externally to build collaborators and, go for grant opportunities saying, hey, I have worked with some people, but I have not worked with some of them. So how do we go about it? And so I think I agree with Liz that some opportunity to collaborate or provide your expertise is helpful to build those collaborations. So it's in a very it comes for me in a sinusoidal wave. Sometimes internally you're spending a lot of time, and then externally it has a very wavy feature to it.
Mm.
And I'd say my answer is very similar to Shiv. At the beginning, I really didn't strike that balance. I was much more internally focused. And I think this kind of gradually progressed over time to being more balanced and working with internal and external collaborators. As I became more established in my work, I grew in my confidence as a PI, and my research started going in some new directions that kind of required expertise of people outside my immediate network. And also my work is very community based and community engaged. So I think starting to develop collaborations based on that approach also helped me branch out more.
And actually, Liz, let me build on that and ask you and Risa to comment on this in particularly. When you think about some of your research in the community and having to go off campus, identify community partners, find places to collect the data that you're collecting, what are some of the biggest challenges that both of you have faced in the last couple of years? And try to answer that, if you will, putting the pandemic aside. So think about this more kind of in a perfect world. What are for people who are thinking about doing this and collecting data in the community who maybe have never done it before, they haven't done it since their dissertation. What are some words of wisdom that both of you have on how to get started?
Liz, would you like to go first, or do you want me to?
Sure, go ahead. Please
Okay.
go ahead, and I'll
All right.
follow.
Well, one of the things that I think of immediately is if you're doing community-based work in the right way, then the biggest challenge in my mind, it's inherent, it's going to be time. And it's time on multiple levels. So, first, even being able to have that first interaction and then develop a trusted partnership from that and be able to move forward in a meaningful way. Also, if you're doing community engaged work, it can include learning for sure what matters to the community, to your stakeholders, so that the research is mutually beneficial. But then also, if it's truly community engaged and thinking about the levels of engagement, it can include informal trainings and helping community partners or lay people actually understand research or understand aspects of research so that they can best contribute and engage. Also, it can mean setting up systems or creating systems or working with community in a way that's completely new for them. That takes time. And then in addition to the relationship building, if it's a new partnership, there's also the ongoing nurturing of the relationships, checking in, making sure that that there's that dialogue or, a two-way street. And I think, so the biggest challenge really is time, but that's just inherent. So it's a challenge, particularly if people are going to start doing it, but it's just part of the work. So I would say that, so the biggest challenge in my mind, yes, it's a challenge, but it's not something that can't be overcome with patience and understanding and really being motivated and driven to be a mutual partner. At least that's how I view my community work. Liz, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree, Risa. I think it's really kind of aligning your own expectations with this process. But just to add a bit to what you said, I agree. Time is, you have to be flexible. There's a lot less predictability, a lot less control, and you have to, again, kind of shift your expectations to account for that. I'll just kind of give an example from my K Award. I did a community-based project in which I trained mental health providers at programs in the community to deliver the study intervention. And I guess I sort of naively went into this thinking that I'd train a couple of folks, we'd do the intervention, the study would be done. But there's a lot of staff turnover, had to retrain folks, had to end up adding study sites because we couldn't recruit enough people or there wasn't an interventionist available at the particular site at the time. So you have to be creative, you have to adapt. And again, you have to maybe not go into projects as naively as I did and expect that some of these challenges might happen and have a plan in place.
Yeah, definitely. The flexibility and uncertainty completely. I agree with everything that you said. Very much part and parcel to the challenges of community work.
Yeah, and if we have time, go ahead. I'm sorry, Liz.
I just wanted to add that, outside of even just the community work, if you are collaborating with, I do a lot of collaboration with local and sort of other clinics around the country. So I'm talking with MDs, talking with, nurses and nurse practitioners and trying to figure out how to collect data in that way. I find that starting small and showing your worth has been the most effective way because, if you find a good partner, they're excited to help, but they're not living and breathing this. I am. So if I put in more time at the front to first find something that's on the, again, the easier end to start doing, to show them that first paper, to show them that first, whatever we need to do together, as well as trying to handle as much of the administrative stuff on my end as possible, then I find that allows me to go bigger, which in that case, often they will put more in on their end because there's a reason to keep doing it. So I find sometimes scaling up, because Liz, I definitely have a lot of that, oh, that was not as easy as I expected, even with that, even with sort of a scaling up. But I find that starting small, showing my worth, taking as much of the administrative load as I can be really fruitful if I just put the time in.
Yeah,
And Liz, go ahead, Rita. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think it
sorry, Liz.
also necessitates that you have conversations with partners at the beginning about what is going to be meaningful to them. What does their involvement look like in an ideal world for them, and what are they hoping to get out of the project? And I think that just makes partners that much more committed from the start as well.
So let's flip this issue upside down a little bit and talk about the challenges of bringing study participants into your labs on campus for, in Liz Heller Murray's case and Shiv's case, for a range and a different type of assessment. What are some of the biggest challenges that, and not just the two of you, but all four of you face when you do that?
I mean, I can, I think I began in the lab where participants came in the lab, both in my graduate studies, in my postdoctoral work, and also at Temple. But we have kind of transitioned to the community. Some of the key challenges are accessibility, transportation, especially for people with disabilities, if they're using a wheelchair. So this happened just last year, both my PhD student and I, we have this person who came in a wheelchair. Luckily, Pearson Hall has multiple entrances, but she entered the lift, or the lift that goes up. But we did not know that only a person from outside can open the door for that. So basically, some of these, even though we are in like building state-of-the-art buildings, some of the accessibility issues still exist, that there is an expectation that there's a person from outside who presses a button for this person to come out. So accessibility, flexibility with the team, like, your team members spend, if you have equipment or if you need to warm up some equipment for its calibration, you think participant is coming, and if they are a no-show, your team members or yourself, you're like, oh, I lost half a day here. So how do you overcome that no-show state of mentality or state of mind, right? How do you switch to something productive? So those are some of the challenges that we have faced here. But again, would love to hear what others have to say.
So I have a very similar experience where I had come to the beginning of my research, especially prior to Temple, was like, yeah, I'm gonna, I have all these very intricate studies, and we're gonna have I do a lot of pediatric work, so they're gonna come into lab, and then I found out that, people don't have time. I now have a 6-year-old, and I'm like, yeah, I mean, I would love to do a bunch of stuff, but that's not always gonna happen. So I had to sort of think about the population that I was working with. So what I do on campus is I do mostly stuff with the college age population. So a lot of times I need like perceptual ratings or intelligibility or things like that. That within CPH, especially within our department, we can offer extra credit for if you work it out with the professor. So I always send to my department at the beginning of anytime I'm running studies, and my colleagues do this as well, we send out and say, hey, we have this study. If you have an extra credit option, and let us know. And then we sort of send them the list at the end of the semester. I do have some funds to pay subjects, but you get enough extra credit that honestly, if you didn't have funds, you could probably do a lot of it just with that, which is great, especially at the end of the semester. And it's not that I won't ever be bringing kids into lab, because I think that there are stuff that requires more intricate work. But I realized that I needed to prioritize, again, equity and access over the perfect experiment. So I started thinking more about, am I doing it this way because it's the best way to do it, or because I've always done it? And I've always, this is not quite something that fits in the real world. And if I want to get an actual representative sample and actually look at these things, it really challenged me to think more about what my question is and how can I get that in maybe a slightly less controlled but more realistic environment.
For me, I don't need instrumentation. So I've never had people come to campus on any campus I've been on. I've always gone out to the community, and that's how I was trained. You go to community. And so, that might be in a church basement. It might be at the local library. Like, you find out from your partners the places that people would feel safe going. And then the big thing in terms of participation in my career, response rates have been harder and harder to come by in terms of good response rates. And so incentives have always been very important, but even more so now. And also just thinking about incentives that matter to the population that I'm working with, right? So sometimes it might be enough money for a voucher for public transportation, making sure that I am not giving, like a Target gift card when there's no Target in the area, things like that.
Reese, I'm really thrilled you chimed in there with that, because I think it's such an interesting perspective that, in our college where our programs and our disciplines are so diverse, that those of you who are true public health people, you've been always trained to be in the community, whereas, a lot of us who worked in other settings or our disciplines historically have been people come to us and we do the assessments. And now we're kind of figuring out what you and I think part of it is because of the technology, part of it is because of the culture of our college. So many of our areas are now saying no, we need to be going out, not having people come to us if we really want to understand what's going on in communities, affect change at the community level, and so forth. And I'm just struck as you said that, for some of us, we're like, it's like, oh, I've discovered this whole new world. And you all are sitting out there on the park bench with the popcorn saying, come on in, the water's fine. So, I mean, that probably could be a session in and of itself on kind of how research has evolved over time. And, we think about conducting behaviorally based and, psychosocial and, all the different data points that we collect, and how many of us have shifted to let's figure out how to be outward facing rather than inward facing. So I want to pivot.
I just want to say, David, I feel like also COVID had a little bit to do with that as well.
Sure.
Shiv, you felt that as well, but I felt that people who are used to having people come in, we suddenly had to say, how are we still productive? We shifted, and then we said, oh, we're still getting great answers. So I think it's been a really interesting time, kind of just with that as well.
I agree, and as some of you have heard me say, that first spring of the pandemic in 2020, I mean, there was palpable anxiety and research leadership at the university around how many people are going to have to shut down their labs, how many people are just simply not going to be able to get something done. And as I've said before, in the context of just looking at the number of grants that we've processed, the number of grants that have gone out the door, that fear ended up being unfounded, because our productivity with regards to pursuing extramural funding went up significantly. Now, some of it you could just say is, well, we were all at home and we had more time to write grants. But I also think your point is right on, which is many of us figured out, we were forced, we all knew there was potential, but it kind of forced us to say, all right, jump into the deep end of the pool, figure out how to make it work. And a lot of us were able to do that. So I think that's a really important point too. So as we are sweet past the bottom of the hour, and I get to the last few questions that I had, if obviously those of you listening, if you have questions or comments, want to join the discussion, feel like I'm on NPR all of a sudden, feel free to put something in the Q&A feature of the chat. One question I have for all of you, and you can be candid with this because I don't think any members of the ORA team are on. How have you figured out how to work effectively with that group? Because all of you have. And I think that I think for some people, and in a few weeks, we're actually doing a kind of a booster orientation for faculty members who are interested in getting more engaged in research and pursuing grant funding, but maybe didn't do that when they onboarded with us, the formal orientation with ORA. But how have all of you figured out how to work effectively with the ORA team?
I'm happy to start us off. I think I try to be really mindful that research administration works with many more people than just myself. And so to the best of my ability, when I know I'm going to be, or when I think I'm going to be submitting a grant, I try to reach out at that point and just put it on their radar. And with pre-award, I just try to be in regular communication as deadlines get closer. With post-award, I had initially started off with requesting meetings as needed to go over things like spending and projections. I've shifted more to now to having standing meetings so that I can stay on top of things better. And I think these meetings on a regular basis are really helpful too for communication purposes. And then lastly, I also really try to, when there is funding success, reach back out to the pre-award team and say, we got this, because I recognize that they spent a lot of time and effort helping this grant get submitted, and they really deserve to be included in the celebration. So yeah, just try to keep them in the loop about when things are happening like that.
I agree with Liz. I think communication is the top priority. And even for my team, I tell them that, look, you receive an email from pre-award or post-award. Most of the times it's post-award, be very quick. Like, you have to be on there. Like, you have to respond quickly. You can respond later to my email, but you have to respond because they are, like Liz mentioned, working with different number of PIs. So if they lose the attention of my project, then, it might take a little bit of time to catch up back. And they've been great with sharing with their experiences, and there are issues we run into, and they connect me to other PIs, or they have seen multiple issues or aspects from that higher level viewpoint than me. So it's been great.
I agree about the communication and being responsive. I also I see them in many ways, particularly pre-award, being action oriented, so wanting to match that and relying on them for the help that they give, but then also as PI making sure I have time to check over all the documents, because they've done a great job putting things together, but wanting to make sure that I agree, or that there's just this back and forth and dialogue, which sometimes includes me asking questions. Does it have to be done this way? Can we represent this a different way, or talk about it in a different way? And I sometimes will have very last minute things that come from a funder that I couldn't control. And one of the things that I've always appreciated and have let the ORA team know, and also have let David know, they really stay calm under pressure and thinking about what everybody's saying in terms of all of the competing demands and all the grants that are going out the door. And I really feel like, and I don't know, maybe the rest of you feel the same way, but I feel like I am their priority. They have a great knack for making us each feel like what we're doing really matters. So being responsive to them and fully engaging in communication about expectations for the grant would be some of the best ways I would suggest to develop a good working relationship with them.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's so much communication. I mean, I feel like, for some places, like, I mean, not necessarily in this sphere, but sometimes you have a sort of relationship with someone who's helping you out, and you want to try to figure out everything by yourself and then ask them only if you have questions. I don't do that with the team because they know better than I do. So because, when I'm working with Michael, he responds so quickly, I can just say, here's where I'm at. I think it's this, but what do I do? And then it just allows things to move smoother, and then he has it on his radar. And then I also try to remember that, well, first of all, I'm in a position where I am learning a lot of how to put in grants, right? So I have a lot of communication, especially for the first couple ones, and still now for ongoing things that come up, but I don't really understand what a lot of these words mean. So there was a lot of sort of back and forth on that. But I do finally have this realization that what I really need to bring is a clear understanding of my project and what I need, because the clearer I can be with that, the better that I can set it up for them to do their part. So I have a bunch of, I have a grant that went in with a whole bunch of sub awards. So I figured out what he had sent, Michael had sent to another group for sub awards. I made 3 different folders for all of them. I updated all the information and then I sent it to him and I said, is this everything? He went through it, made a couple changes, and then he communicated it out. So I was like, listen, you're doing a million things. You sent me the template. I'm going to follow it and go forward. And then the other thing that I do is I write down everything on my own. So when I'm like, I will probably ask this question a million times, but maybe let me look at my flowchart and see if I found it there before. That can be very helpful. Like, if I do this, I need to talk to this person. So I try to give myself some cues and always let them know when there's success. I mean, when I have success, I email David, I email my chair, and I email Michael. So
Yeah, and I'm a couple of reactions to what you all have said. First of all, thank you for your kind words about the team. We are incredibly fortunate. We since I came into this position, we have always had just a dedicated, engaged, talented team supporting us. And not only do they do an exceptional job in supporting us, I think for many of them, they are genuinely interested in the types of work that we do and the issues that we address. They are in our college because I think for many, if not all of them, public health resonates with them on some level. So they kind of share in our mission. I'm thrilled to hear that you both go out of your way to thank them and to tell them about your successes, because believe it or not, they really enjoy hearing that, because so many times, we all submit so many grants that don't get funded. We should all be celebrating when the wins happen. Liz, you didn't use this word, but the word that I always like to use when I think about them is trust, which is, you made reference to how, we come out of our training programs, we come out of our dissertations, and our dissertations are oftentimes this very isolating, you as the candidate have to do everything. And so your instinct early on in your career is to still do everything. And yet the ORA team is there to do the budgets and the justification and take care of the, behind the scenes stuff on the sub awards, so you can focus on the relationships, on the science, on getting that stuff out the door. But I think for some people it is hard, particularly early in the career, but I think understandably so, to hand that over to somebody else and kind of say, it's almost like the thing you try to throw away and it remains stuck to your hand. You just can't, you don't want to completely give it over to them. But the other thing I'll just say is that I've also been struck by in working with the team, just even in the last year, and there was a couple of examples earlier this week. I think we have such an experienced team at this point. They are now starting to anticipate the problems. And so instead of being reactive, in some ways they're being proactive. And whether that's dealing with, they see a thunderstorm on the horizon and they want to get us out ahead of it, or, we're working on an application and we're realizing that this subaward is being not responsive. And a lot of times they are now comfortable enough to show appropriate initiative and kind of move the ball along, take that burden off of you as the PI, and give you again that bandwidth back to focus on preparing the application. So, I think learning how to trust them, and trust any research administrator is an important skill. And if you're able to have that trusting relationship, it is an invaluable asset. So, so I wanna pivot to a fun question. And I kind of came up with this one earlier this week because, I think as researchers, we are oftentimes stretched very thin. We have other demands on our time, both with the university, demands on, responsibilities outside of our careers. And yet, we all probably have a bunch of manuscripts in our briefcase that aren't yet done. We have a bunch of where we have a wish list of projects we wish we could tackle. So if I gave each of you an extra 10 hours a week, for work-related purposes, what would you do? Like if you could set aside some additional time each week for the next 6 months, what would be your passion project? Resources be damned, by the way.
Right. I would split it 30%, 33, 33, 33. Like one would be like what next to work on, reading a lot and talking to folks, because lack of literature or evidence does not mean that someone else has not tried. So that would be like 30%. 30% would be what, if I can offer my expertise or provide my expertise to others in the college, where we can eventually build collaborations. And the other 30% is improve the tools that we are using. We use technology for patterns and data, and it keeps changing so much that we have to keep our head above the water. So those will be my thoughts, 3 things. Yeah.
I want to go off script and not say something about work, because I think, the reason I say that is because we do work a lot.
Yeah.
Many of us probably would be classified as workaholics,
Yeah.
right? And so in my mind, some of what I'd want to do has nothing to do with my work, but sticking to your question, I think I am doing PFAS research, but it really is new for me. And it's new because community partners approached me, let me know that this was an issue locally. And so it is not something that I'm as well grounded in as I am for all of my other research. So spending about half of my time, or maybe I'll do a 33-66 split. So 33% on that. And then the other thing, I get a lot of satisfaction and feel it's important for professional growth. So if I had $40,000 and the time, I would want to be part of the ELAM network, the Executive Leadership in Academic Medicine. It's really geared for female leaders.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Risa. Actually, they just had their meeting in Philadelphia last week, and I have a longstanding colleague and friend who's at Cleveland Clinic, who was actually in town and had dinner with her. And I do have to say, in hearing what they do, it does sound like a phenomenal program, because it's not just hand waving. It's like you got to go home and you got to come up with some kind of project for your environment that kind of moves the needle. You got to get buy-in from leadership. And I agree with you. If we had the resources available, and there are, even though it's geared towards academic medicine, Leslie, who's also a psychologist, said there were several people from colleges of public health who were participating right now. And it just sounds like a fantastic mid-career training program. All right, Shiv, Liz, or I'm sorry, Liz and Liz, what would you do? Liz and Liz.
I'm kind of going to take the Risa route for this, because I have very intentionally tried to balance my work and my life and the work that I choose to do as things that bring me a lot of joy. And so I don't actually really have, there's things that I put in money for that I've, that obviously if I get those grants, that changes what I'm doing. But I very intentionally focus my time in things that I feel like have the most impact, have good collaborations, and bring me a lot of joy. And so I don't really see, I think if I had a lot of things that I was like, oh, I always want to do this, I always want to do that, I think I would work literally all the time and never see my child and never do my pottery class, which is super fun. So like, I do find that is something that I already have that satisfaction. I would say if I had any extra time, I would put it towards mentoring students. I have a lot of satisfaction in that. I do already put a lot of time into that, but that is the only thing that I do where I take time away when I'm like, I know this is extra time that maybe I should be doing something else, but it's really valuable. So if I had a little bit more time, I would put in there. But I don't know, I just have a lot of satisfaction with what I do, and I feel like that helps me keep balanced.
Liz?
Yeah, I think my initial reaction to your question, David, was I would write some of those manuscripts from papers that or from projects that have finished. But I think thinking about new research directions, this new center is really taking me in new directions. Just to give some context, it's a center focused on promoting community living and community participation among transition-age youth with serious mental health conditions from marginalized or disadvantaged backgrounds. And one of the issues that I came across in developing the grant application was what's known as the civic engagement gap. And this is this notion that there are these kind of structural inequities and barriers that prevent individuals from marginalized backgrounds from engaging in civic life to the same degree as more privileged peers. And so that really struck me. We do have a training, a non-research related project on civic engagement as part of the center, but if I had to choose a new research direction, I might focus on that more, because I really think civic engagement could be a pathway to more community participation more broadly.
So as we get to the top of the hour, let me take a moment and thank the four of you for joining us today. This, much like last week where we focused on having members of our faculty talk about how they write and how they get things done and maximize their productivity, it was not only great to hear your guys' perspective on, the issue of the day of how you manage your research teams and your labs, but also, to hear a little bit about, some of the balance of work life and things you would do if you had a little bit more time and the things that you love about your jobs and working with some of your colleagues here. So I want to thank the four of you for an absolutely wonderful session. I definitely enjoyed it. I enjoyed hearing about it. And as any of you have me on camera, I was smiling a great deal and really enjoyed it. So thank you all. And looking forward to the next couple of weeks, we've got some really interesting programming for the rest of the month. So next week, I apologize. We're having a session dedicated to issues around cancer. Jen, Ibrahim, and I, over the last year or so, have been in we've had a number of conversations, including one earlier this week, with our colleagues out at the Fox Chase Cancer Center. They are very much interested in finding ways to not only maximize some of our longstanding and existing partnerships and collaborations, but also identifying new ones. Much like some of our colleagues in the School of Medicine, they have very busy and active clinicians up there who are sitting on mountains of very interesting novel data, and they just don't have the time and bandwidth to analyze that data. They value interprofessional care and education in much the same way we do. They do a lot of team-based care. And we think there are numerous opportunities to collaborate with them, as well as our colleagues in the School of Medicine who focus on cancer care. And so we're going to have representatives from Fox Chase, as well as the School of Dentistry, and our college, talk about some of their work in cancer. And my hope is it stimulates more conversation about novel collaborations going forward. 2 weeks after that, we have our Teaching Excellence Symposium. I believe many of you probably saw the most recent invitation earlier today. And in seeing a little bit about the program, I really encourage you to set aside that time on that Friday from mid-morning until early afternoon to really have an opportunity to come together and learn from our colleagues about the strategies that they use to promote excellence in the classroom. And I remember when we did it a year ago last December, it was time well spent. And I know I learned a lot of very valuable tricks and suggestions that I've certainly brought into the classroom. And then the last Friday in February, the ORA team, who we sung their kudos today, they will be presenting a booster session for members of our community who didn't go through the initial onboarding with them when they joined and can actually go ahead and learn how to work effectively with them and the do's and the don'ts and the tricks of the trade. So with that, I wish all of you a great weekend. Again, I want to thank our panelists for a really engaging, wonderful, and enjoyable session. And I look forward to seeing most, if not all of you next week. Take care, everyone.
Thanks,